When my wife looked me dead in the eye and announced she had a date tomorrow, I didn't yell. I didn't beg. Instead, I booked dinner with her boss. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to watch someone realize they've lost everything they were testing you for, this is that story. My name's Alan. I'm 38, and until recently, I believed I was living a life most people would trade for in a heartbeat. Jessica and I met in college, dated through the chaos of our 20s, and built what looked like a solid marriage. We had a small place in Seattle, decent jobs, shared hobbies. It was the kind of life you look at from the outside and assume nothing could crack. But when something breaks, it doesn't always do it loudly. Sometimes it happens so gradually you almost miss it. A slow drifting apart disguised as busyness, polite smiles covering the distance, and little habits you ignore because you'd rather not think too hard about why they've started. I'd noticed the signs before she ever admitted anything. The way she started turning her phone face down on the kitchen counter. The late nights she blamed on deadlines that didn't add up. The sudden new interest in literature she used to call pretentious. But you don't want to believe the person you trust most is quietly choosing someone else. So you pretend. You give the benefit of the doubt because you think that's what loyalty means. That Tuesday night was unremarkable, which made it worse somehow. We were on the couch, a movie neither of us was really watching playing in the background. I'd been half listening to the dialogue while wondering if I should suggest we go away for the weekend. Try to reconnect. Fix whatever was slipping. And then she said it. I have a date tomorrow. No build-up. No apology. Just the sentence like she was reading a headline. It's strange how fast a moment like that can flip your entire perception of someone. 1 minute you think you know who's sitting next to you. The next, you realize you've been living beside a stranger. I remember pressing pause on the movie, though I couldn't have told you what scene was frozen on the screen. I turned to her, searching for some flicker of regret or shame. But she looked almost relieved, like she'd finally dropped a weight she'd been carrying. Cool, I said, my voice sounding calmer than I felt. I already booked a table with Gregory. Her eyes snapped toward me so fast I thought she'd misheard. My boss Gregory? Yeah. Same time, same place, I replied. Dinner. For a second, her practiced composure slipped. She reached for her phone, probably hoping she could scroll herself back to a version of reality where I was still predictable. But I didn't wait for her to find it. I stood up, walked out of the room, and left her there alone with her confusion. I know what you might be thinking, why didn't I get angry? Why didn't I accuse her of betraying everything we'd built? The answer is simple. I was tired. Not of her specifically, but of trying to be the man who kept us together single-handedly. People think betrayal is always dramatic. Tears, screaming, slammed doors. But more often it's quieter. It's the small decisions that pile up until something finally snaps. I hadn't always been this detached. In the beginning, I was the guy who stayed up late talking about dreams, who bought flowers just because they reminded me of her laugh, who thought that if I worked hard enough, loved her consistently enough, it would be impossible for her to doubt what we had. But somewhere along the way, Jessica decided predictability was a prison. She never said it outright, but it showed in the way she sighed when I asked about her day, the way she rolled her eyes when I suggested movie nights or walks by the pier. Small signs that I was no longer enough, though she didn't have the courage to say it. The evening she told me about her date was the same night I realized I was done trying to prove my worth to someone who treated my steadiness like a flaw. I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt. It did. But the hurt was tangled up with something else. Relief. Because when you finally see the truth, you can stop fighting to unsee it. That's where the story really begins, not with the confession itself, but with the moment I understood I wasn't obligated to react the way she expected. I didn't have to beg for an explanation or perform outrage to prove I cared. Instead, I made a decision. I'd let her believe she was in control for long enough. If she wanted to test the boundaries of our marriage, fine. But she'd find out I wasn't the man she thought she could keep on a leash. So I booked that dinner with Gregory, not to humiliate her but to remind myself that I had options. 2. That her choices didn't get to define whether I still respected myself. When I left her sitting on the couch that night, she probably thought it was just a bluff. That eventually, I'd come back with apologies, ready to negotiate the terms of her betrayal. She had no idea I was already halfway out the door. The next morning felt different, even before either of us said a word. Jessica barely looked at me as I poured my coffee. I could see her glancing at her phone every few seconds, hoping for a notification that would prove last night was some misunderstanding. She didn't get one. I left for work without acknowledging her tension. In the past, I would have paused, tried to smooth things over, asked if she wanted to talk. But that part of me had gone quiet. Around noon, I got a text from Gregory confirming dinner. He didn't ask any questions, just sent a short, polite reply that he was looking forward to discussing new project ideas. He had no idea what else this dinner meant. By evening, Jessica's curiosity had turned into barely concealed panic. She didn't ask me directly what I planned to say to her boss, but she hovered nearby when I put on my jacket, as though proximity might force me to volunteer answers. I didn't. "I'll be home late," I said simply as I grabbed my keys. She hesitated like she was about to protest, but then her pride pulled her back. She nodded once, her expression carefully blank. At the restaurant, Gregory was already seated. He greeted me with a smile and shook my hand like this was any other networking dinner. That was exactly what I wanted it to look like. We talked about work. I asked about upcoming campaigns, budgets, future plans. Nothing out of place. But at one point, he mentioned Jessica. "She's sharp," he said, sipping his drink. "You know, she really pushes herself, takes on more than most." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. I wasn't there to start rumors or threaten him. I just wanted Jessica to understand she couldn't control this narrative anymore. Somewhere across town, she was probably sitting on the couch, imagining worst-case scenarios. And the truth was she should have. Not because I planned to sabotage her career, but because she needed to feel the weight of consequences she'd never considered. Halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One image. A clear photo of me and Gregory at our table. No text, just a picture. I didn't react. Whoever sent it, maybe one of her friends, maybe nobody I knew, wanted to stir the pot. I let it. When I got home later that night, Jessica was standing by the window, arms folded. She turned as I walked in, her face tight with restrained anger. "You actually went," she said. I set my keys on the counter. "Of course. Did you tell him anything?" I met her stare. "We talked about business." She took a breath, like she was deciding how honest to be. "Someone sent me a picture. Of you two. At dinner." I shrugged. "Looks like you're not the only one with an audience." Her jaw tightened. "This is petty." I almost laughed. "Is it? You told me you had a date tomorrow like it was weather." I responded in kind. She looked down, tapping her phone against her palm. "You know you're sabotaging me." "No," I corrected her calmly. "I'm reminding you that I'm not the background character in your story." She didn't argue further. Maybe she realized she'd lost the upper hand. Maybe she was just too tired to pretend otherwise. That night, she slept in the guest room. I didn't check on her. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the strangest sense of clarity. For years, I'd accepted the version of us where I made allowances for her moods and excuses for her choices. But the moment she decided to test me, she gave me permission to stop pretending. The next morning, she was gone when I woke up. No note, no message. I didn't reach out. Instead, I made coffee, read the news, and started thinking about what came next. Later that day, she called. Not to apologize, but to demand explanations. "You don't get to turn this into a spectacle," she said as soon as I picked up. "I didn't," I replied evenly. "You did that when you announced your date." She exhaled sharply. "We could have talked about it. You could have asked me why. Would it have changed anything?" There was silence. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "That's the problem," I said. "You want me to sit here and help you figure out who you are, while you burn down what we built." She hung up. For the next few days, we barely spoke. She moved through the apartment like a tenant rather than a partner. Every time our eyes met, there was this unspoken awareness that we'd crossed a line we couldn't step back over. Friday night, she tried to cook dinner, maybe hoping the ritual would reset something between us. I thanked her, but I didn't sit down to eat. Instead, I packed a small bag and told her I'd be staying at a hotel for the weekend. She didn't ask where or why. She didn't try to stop me. When I walked out, it struck me how final it felt, even though I knew technically nothing was settled yet. That's the thing about crossing boundaries. You can't always see the moment you go too far. But when you look back, you realize it's already over. That weekend, I sat alone in a quiet hotel room, thinking about what I wanted. Not what she wanted or what my friends would advise. Just what I needed to feel like myself again. And for the first time in years, the answer wasn't complicated. I needed to be done. By the time I came home Sunday night, the apartment felt less like a shared space and more like a set we were both pretending belonged to us. Jessica was sitting at the table, scrolling her phone, trying not to look as nervous as she was. She didn't ask where I'd been. I didn't offer it. We passed each other in the hallway a few times without speaking. The tension had settled into something heavy but quiet, the way a storm sometimes lingers after the rain has stopped. Monday morning, I woke early. I had decided what I was going to do, not out of spite, but because I couldn't pretend anymore. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen counter, and started sorting through the stack of documents I'd been avoiding, the ones I'd asked my sister, a family lawyer, to draft. It wasn't an easy decision. Even then, a part of me hoped Jessica would come in, sit across from me, and admit she was scared or sorry. But I'd learned something in the past week. Her silence wasn't uncertainty. It was calculation. She was waiting to see if I would fold first. When she finally appeared, her eyes landed on the papers spread out in front of me. She stood there a long moment, reading the bold title, Marital Dissolution Agreement. "You're serious," she said quietly. I didn't look up. Yes. Her voice stayed even, but I could hear how hard she was working to keep it there. "So this is it. You're just going to file for divorce." "I'm not just doing anything," I said. "I'm making a decision you made easier for me." She pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. "You think this is fair?" "It's not about fair," I replied. "It's about honest. And neither of us has been honest in a long time." Jessica crossed her arms, her expression defensive. "I didn't sleep with anyone." I nodded. "I know. Then why are you acting like I did?" "Because you were preparing to." She swallowed, her eyes flicking to the stack of pages between us. "That's not true." "Jessica," I said, finally meeting her stare. "You set up a date with another man. You were halfway out the door. The only thing you didn't do was finish the job." Her jaw tightened. "People make mistakes." "I agree," I said. "But mistakes are when you slip up once, not when you spend weeks planning it." The words seemed to land harder than anything I'd said before. She looked down at her hands. For the first time, she didn't have a ready defense. I gathered the papers, tucked them into a folder, and set it on the table between us. "You don't have to sign anything today, but I want you to read it." Jessica didn't move to touch it. Instead, she took a shaky breath and said, "You think this is going to make you feel better?" "No," I answered truthfully, "but it will make me feel finished." She sat there silently while I stood and walked into the bedroom to pack a few more things. When I came back out, she was still in the same spot. "I don't understand how you can be so calm," she said, her voice low. "I'm not calm," I told her. "I'm resolved." That afternoon, she texted me a series of messages. Some sounded angry, others almost apologetic. She asked if we could talk in person, if I'd give her a chance to explain. I read them all but didn't reply. Late that night, I came back to the apartment one last time. She was in the kitchen, a pie cooling on the counter. "Apple, my favorite." She looked up as I stepped inside, her eyes searching my face for some reaction. "I made this for you," she said, her voice hopeful. I nodded. "I know." She waited, but I didn't offer any comfort. She gestured at the empty chair. "Will you sit with me? Just for a minute?" I did. Not because I believed it would change anything, but because I knew she needed to see how little it would fix. We sat in silence. Finally, she spoke. "I don't want this to end like this." I kept my gaze steady. "You ended it the night you decided I wasn't enough." I thought you'd fight for me, she whispered. That's exactly why I'm not. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time since this started, she looked genuinely lost. I could see she wanted to reach across the table, to ask me to forgive her. Maybe even to pretend this was all just a rough patch we could recover from. But she didn't, and I didn't offer to bridge the distance. I don't hate you, I said quietly. She looked surprised. Then why are you doing this? Because I finally realized I don't have to prove I deserve better. I can just choose it. Jessica closed her eyes, her breath shaky. You're really leaving? Yes. We sat there a while longer, neither of us moving. I waited to feel regret, but all I felt was relief. When I finally stood, she didn't follow me to the door. She didn't call my name. She just stayed seated, hands folded in front of her, staring down at the pie she'd made as some last attempt to turn the clock back. I left the folder on the table, right beside her elbow, and walked out without looking back. The next morning, I woke up in my new apartment. It was a small one-bedroom near Green Lake, nothing special, but it felt like something that belonged only to me. No reminders of arguments. No silent standoffs in hallways. Just space. I didn't expect it to feel good. But as I made coffee and sat down to check my email, I realized it felt better than I'd imagined. Not happy, exactly. More like a quiet steadiness I hadn't felt in years. Jessica didn't call that day. She didn't text either. Maybe she thought silence would draw me back. Maybe she was hoping I'd spend my first night alone feeling regret. But that night, when I lay in bed listening to the rain against the window, regret never came. Over the next week, I settled into a routine. I went to work, came home, cooked for myself, and slept without waking up to that tight, uneasy feeling in my chest. I didn't feel the need to check her social media or wonder where she was. Meanwhile, she was unraveling. I knew because her sister called me on Thursday. She wanted to know if I'd talked to Jessica, if I'd at least agree to one last conversation before filing anything official. I think she thought you'd come back, her sister said carefully. I know, I replied. You won't. No, I said. I won't. There was a pause on the line. She's not handling this well. I'm not responsible for that, I answered, my voice calm. The call ended soon after. I sat there with my phone in my hand, waiting for any guilt to surface. But the truth was, I'd spent too many years feeling responsible for Jessica's happiness. I wasn't going to do it anymore. On Saturday, I stopped by the old apartment to pick up the last of my things. She knew I was coming, but she wasn't there. The place felt emptier than I'd ever seen it. Even with furniture still in place, the atmosphere had changed. It no longer felt like home. I packed in silence, boxing up a few books, some records, and a jacket I'd forgotten in the hall closet. I was halfway through taping the last box when I saw the pie dish still sitting by the sink, unwashed. I left it there. When I finished, I wrote a short note on the kitchen counter. Take care of yourself. No signature, no explanation, just that. A few days later, she finally called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Alan, she began, her voice uncertain. Can we meet? What for? I need to say some things. Say them now, I said. I can't over the phone. I was silent. Please, she added. One conversation. After a moment, I agreed. Not because I thought it would change anything, but because I knew I wouldn't have any lingering questions once it was over. We met in a small coffee shop near her office. She was already there when I walked in, staring at the table. When she looked up, I saw she'd been crying. Thank you for coming, she said softly. I didn't respond. She cleared her throat. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know I wasn't trying to hurt you. You were trying to see if you could live without me, I said. She nodded, wiping her eyes. And I couldn't. I still can't. I didn't look away. That doesn't mean I should come back. I know, she whispered. But if I don't say it, I'll regret it. I waited. I took you for granted, she continued. I thought you'd always be there. I thought if I pushed you, you'd fight to stay. You were wrong, I said. She closed her eyes for a moment. I see that now. The server came by. Neither of us ordered anything. When she opened her eyes again, she looked tired, but there was no anger left in her face. You were a good husband, Alan. Better than I deserved. I didn't respond to that. And the night I told you about the date, I think part of me wanted you to stop me, to tell me it wasn't allowed. I wasn't going to police your choices, I replied. She nodded again, her hands folding around a paper napkin. And when you didn't, I realized you were done. I said simply. I'm sorry, she whispered. I believed her, but it didn't change anything. After a while, she asked, is there any part of you that still loves me? I thought about that carefully before answering. There's a part of me that always will, I said. But it's not the part that makes me want to stay. Her eyes filled again, but she didn't try to argue. I stood, ready to leave. She didn't reach for my hand, didn't beg. She just sat there watching me. At the door, I paused. I hope you find what you're looking for. She nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak. I walked out into the afternoon sunlight. As I reached my car, I felt something I hadn't expected. Closure. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, letting it sink in. There would be paperwork to finalize, assets to divide, friends who'd pick sides. But none of that felt as heavy as I'd feared, because the hardest part was over. The pretending was finished. In the weeks that followed, the rest of the process was surprisingly straightforward. Papers were signed without argument. The lease was transferred to her name. We divided the accounts, the car, the furniture. It all happened without raised voices or second-guessing. It struck me as odd how something that once felt impossible could be reduced to forms and signatures. But that was the reality. Our marriage had ended long before either of us admitted it. This was just the paperwork catching up. People around us struggled more with it than we did. My coworkers kept asking if I was okay. My sister called every night at first, waiting for me to crack. Even my mom tried to convince me that marriages went through phases, that maybe I should consider counseling before making anything final. But there was nothing left to fix. What nobody seemed to understand was that Jessica hadn't destroyed us by having feelings for someone else. She'd destroyed us by deciding she was entitled to keep me on standby while she explored those feelings. When someone sees your loyalty as an obstacle instead of a gift, there isn't a version of the story where you can stay and still respect yourself. Jessica reached out a few times, not to beg me to come back, but to share updates. She said she'd started seeing a therapist. She'd signed up for a writing class. She was trying to figure out who she really was. I didn't wish her ill. I didn't feel vindictive, but I also didn't feel responsible. One afternoon, about 2 months after I'd moved out, she sent me one last message. I hope someday you understand I never meant to hurt you. I read it twice before replying. I do understand, but that doesn't make it any less true. She didn't respond. That was the last time we spoke. The new apartment gradually became a place that felt like mine. I hung shelves. I bought a second-hand record player. I started running in the mornings again, something I'd stopped doing years ago when life got too crowded with obligations. At first, I expected to feel lonely, and there were nights when the silence settled in heavier than I liked. But even then, it was better than the silence I'd known before, the one that lived between us when we were both pretending everything was fine. Friends asked if I planned to start dating again. I told them honestly that I wasn't ready, not because I was hung up on her, but because I needed to understand my own patterns before I risked repeating them. It was only after everything ended that I realized how much of my energy had gone into managing Jessica's emotions. How many times I'd swallowed discomfort, told myself that good men don't walk away, and convinced myself that compromise meant erasing parts of who I was. One evening, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, thinking about all the versions of my life I'd imagined when we first got married. None of them included this ending. But that didn't mean this one was worse. It was just honest. A few weeks later, her sister ran into me at the grocery store. She looked uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure what she was allowed to say. She misses you, she offered finally. I'm sure she does, I said calmly. She thought you'd come back. I know. Her sister looked like she wanted to defend Jessica, to explain all the reasons she'd acted the way she did. But she didn't. She just nodded, wished me well, and walked away. I finished my shopping and went home, thinking about that expectation, that I'd come back, that I'd see her regret and decide it was enough to erase everything. But regret is not the same thing as change. Jessica never understood that. I did. Some people think the moral of this story is about revenge. That my dinner with her boss was payback. That leaving was a punishment. But the truth is simpler. The moral is that you don't owe anyone your dignity. You don't have to stay just because you invested years in a relationship. You don't have to prove you were worthy of respect by waiting for someone to come around. You are allowed to walk away the moment you realize your love has turned into a performance. You're allowed to choose peace over potential. I don't regret the years I spent with Jessica. We had good moments. We built something real for a time. But when it started to unravel, she assumed my loyalty would keep me tethered no matter how many lines she crossed. She was wrong. I think that's the part she still doesn't understand. That loving someone doesn't mean you let them test you until you break. It means you hold yourself to a standard, even when they don't. If you're ever in the position I was in, wondering if it's better to fight or to leave, here's what I'll tell you. You don't have to wait until you're empty. You don't have to wait until you hate them. You don't have to wait at all. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for them is to end it before there's nothing left but resentment. That's what I did. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation.